Boys and girls, the next family that we're going to talk about now is the woodwind family. And you'll notice not all of the instruments are made out of wood, but some of them are, and that's where it gets the name, woodwind. Now, the wind in the woodwind family is created by blowing. So someone would put the mouthpiece of the instrument into their mouth, and we'll talk about that, and using the air from your lungs, you blow into the instrument to create the sound. Now, that's different from the brass family, because you remember the brass family, you had to buzz. The woodwind family, you blow into the instrument. So we will go through the pictures or the different instruments on this picture, and we'll talk about each instrument individually. This first instrument is called a bass clarinet. It looks like a giant clarinet, and that's really what it is. And it's bigger than the clarinet that you know, or maybe a family member plays. That's a real popular instrument in the Sandwich School bands here. However, it is longer. It has a silver piece on the top that holds the mouthpiece, and it has a silver bell on the bottom where the sound comes out of. It's bigger so it can create lower sounds. Because remember, with instruments, most of the time, the bigger the instrument, the lower the pitch. The smaller the instrument, the higher pitch. This is called the bass clarinet, just like the clarinet, but a little bigger and a little lower. The next instrument in the woodwind family that we are talking about is a saxophone. Now, this particular saxophone in this picture is an alto saxophone. However, there's also a soprano, which looks like a clarinet, but it's made out of this material right here. This is the alto. The tenor would be bigger than this one. And then you have what's called the bari sax. That's quite bigger than that. It does look like a brass instrument. However, it's not because of the metal that it's a woodwind. It's because you create the sound by blowing, by using your wind from your body. Even though it looks like it's the color of a brass instrument, it's not. It's a wind instrument, the tenor sax. This instrument is a clarinet. Clarinet is the instrument that a lot of people who want to be learning instruments in the woodwind family will start on. So for those of you that are going to be interested in joining the band when you're in 5th grade, if you mention to the band director over at Doomer School that you're going to be interested in playing the clarinet or then playing a woodwind instrument, he'll most likely start you out on the clarinet. The nice thing is the clarinet can really easily move you to the saxophone or even the bass clarinet or some of these other instruments because a lot of the fingering, pressing down of the keys is the same. It's just learning how to create the air in different ways. This is called the clarinet. This instrument in the woodwind family is called an oboe, not an elbow, an oboe, O-B-O-E. An oboe has what is called a double reed. So if you look at the very top of this instrument and you see the mouthpiece, it's a lot smaller and it looks wooden, which is different from some of the other mouthpieces that you actually play into. And as we go through and you start to watch some of these demonstrations, you'll get the idea of how they play in the mouthpiece. This is what's called a double reed, and the oboe makes a very different sound. And you'll hear some oboe sounds in some of the demonstrations that we listen to. An oboe is a woodwind instrument. This instrument is called an English horn. Now, you're not going to see many English horns in the bands here in Sandwich. The schools just don't seem to own any English horns. I don't know if it's because they're more expensive or if it's just one of those instruments that's just not too popular to play. But the English horn is also a double reed. You see the instrument, the mouthpiece at the top. Very different from the clarinet or the saxophone. And it can create, you see it's a little bigger than the oboe, so it can create lower sounds, kind of interesting sounds that you hear from an English horn. But that's probably something that if you were interested in playing the English horn in the band, you'd have to talk to one of the band directors and your family about that, because there's not too many instruments that are like the English horn here in Sandwich. This is called the bassoon. This is a great big instrument. It would probably be taller than most of you. It makes a very comical sound, a funny sound. A lot of times, if you're watching old cartoons like Tom and Jerry or Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck, you will hear a bassoon playing silly, funny movements that goes along with what the characters happen to be doing. It is also a double reed, and you see that little curly Q thing there at the end. That's where you blow into the bassoon, and it can create lower pitches than the English horn, even lower pitches than the bass clarinet, which was the first one that we talked about. If you were to be interested in playing the bassoon, you'd probably start on a clarinet or an oboe and move your way to the bassoon, probably in junior high or high school. This is called a contrabassoon. And you see that it's much bigger than even the bassoon. Definitely taller than all of you, most likely taller than me as well. It has got more pipes and more bends in the pipes than the bassoon, and it is much larger, so it can create much, much lower and silly sounds. Not too many contrabassoons around. I think the high school might have one that a student plays every year, but they don't have one at Doomer, and I'm pretty sure there's not one at the middle school either. If the contrabassoon is something that you're interested in, playing one of these great big funny sounding instruments, you can talk to the band director at the middle school, and the middle school band director can work you into the bassoon and then eventually the contrabassoon. This is the flute. Now, another very popular woodwind instrument that you often see and hear in bands. If the flute is something that you're interested in playing, it's small, it's lightweight. It does take some air, but not as much air as some of the other instruments that we've learned about. I really like the sound that the flute creates. It's a real sweet, higher pitched sound than some of the other woodwinds, but there's an interesting way that a flute is played. And you'll see how the flute is played differently than, say, the clarinet. You'll see that in some of the demonstrations that videos that are going to follow. This is the flute, which is a woodwind instrument. Last but not least is the piccolo. It looks like a tiny flute. Now the piccolo, I think it's kind of a funny word because it kind of sounds like pick your nose, but it's not pick your nose, it's piccolo. The piccolo is the highest sounding instrument in the entire band. It's real small, even compared to the flute you see, and it can create the highest pitches. So anytime a piece of music needs higher sounding pitches, the piccolo is what is written in there. There's definitely a piccolo at the middle school and a piccolo at the high school. If that's something that you're interested in playing, you'd probably start on a flute, and then um, if you bring it up to one of the band directors that you'd like to try the piccolo, they would have one available for you to try. Piccolo is a woodwind instrument.